Guys, Ash here. I'm so grateful you're here. I wanted to kind of go over just a really quick video. This is a calcium hydroxide refreshment, and I'll do it here and there. Sometimes we'll place really long-term calcium hydroxide, and then sometimes, like in this case, I'll show you kind of the reason why we elected to. Actually, my dental assistant, I was kind of looking at her, like, what do you think we should do? And she was like, if this was me or my mom or my dad, I'd probably refresh calcium hydroxide. So before we get into this, let's go ahead and take a look at some radiographs. Now, this case here, this is not the exact case, but this case I posted just a little bit, and it's just kind of a follow-up, kind of a little bit of housekeeping, if you may. So this is, we're going to talk about the biopsy report. This tooth was non-restore. I deemed it non-restorable. This lesion was right at the gingival margin, and we had this large lesion. It was necrotic.
Man, that is a huge lead things.
So here's the biopsy report that we just received yesterday. So it was an apical cyst. So in my residency, what they taught me to do, well, actually they didn't. The oral pathologist, who's actually part of the residency, suggested that we send as much information as possible. So I sent a photograph, I sent the radiograph in the package, and I actually sent the root tips, so they can get a better idea of what is going on with this case. It gives them better perspective. And so all of this stuff, you can pause the video and read it. They deemed it, well, not they, it turned out as a radicular cyst, a periapical cyst. So think about that when we walk through this next case. So the next case we're going to talk about is this large necrotic tooth number 26 or 14. And it was a large lesion, and I did not take a cone beam on this case. I elected not to. To me, it's kind of like, I don't think it's gonna. It probably glean more information. Actually, probably deem it more non-restorable in my mind, and be like, wow, that's a huge lesion. It's never going to get. We'll never heal it. So it was a large pulp chamber. If I couldn't find MB2, then we'd probably do that. And then if we didn't get any resolution, then we grab a cone beam before we elect to extract and bone graft. So the first thing I'm going to look at in this case is, why is this tooth necrotic? Now, this patient is a high caries risk. We've placed him on the high caries risk protocol. And it kind of looked like, is this tooth cracked? Why is it necrotic for a long time? And I think what happened was either we had leakage. She's got a number of leaking restorations on the opposing side. But I'm wondering if the pulp horn was nicked when he was a little kid on the distal with this restoration, distal pulp horn with this restoration here, or this restoration here is very close to this pulp horn potentially, or it just leaked over time. So after systematic probing depths and whatnot, we deemed it, it's still good to go. So this is I'm not going to go through the initial treatment. I threw that on YouTube if you want to take a look at it. But this is calcium hydroxide right after we placed it. So we had found MB1, MB2, palatal canal. We used lots of calcium hydroxide. And then distal buccal, we're good. And then we placed some calcium hydroxide, powdered calcium hydroxide, which is 100% calcium hydroxide. And the calcium hydroxide in the canals is UltraCal XS, so it's roughly about 33% calcium hydroxide. And then the powdered is 100%. It's 33%, because there's radiopacifiers, and then there's, I think, propylene glycol, just to keep it kind of in a liquid state. We're a month out. Came back yesterday, and here's at the month. And not looking at, it's really hard to tell if we're getting any bone growth, but, some healing. But the real thing that jumped out at me was like, where did my calcium hydroxide go? So it's kind of like, you know what? Let's go ahead and open this up. I don't know if it's going to make a difference, but let's go ahead and open it up, and we'll replace the calcium hydroxide. And I was sitting in my office like, what would you do? My dental assistant, Christy, was like, what would you do? She's like, probably should clean it, open it up, and then refresh it. So that's what we did. And here's that video. So let's go ahead and play it. Now, I used Fuji 2, which is a resin-modified glass ionomer cement. It's light cured and also auto cure. So one of the things that's been shown in the literature a number of times, I haven't read it since my residency, but it was keeping a thick restoration, minimum roughly around 4 millimeters thick. So that's what we're doing here. It's a really thick restoration because we don't want any leakage, because we were going to plan on leaving it for a long time. So we've got at least a 6 millimeter thick restoration. I'm not trying to show off. The point was is that these resin, if I was going to leave this for 6 months, it's going to wear down quite a bit, and I do not want any leakage into this. For making it to this point in the video, and I just wanted to offer you this. This is our root canal like an endodontist course. It's a course that, you know, if you felt alone during your root canal journey, if you felt stuck, you can't get down a canal, you're blocked, you're ledged. If you want a system-based root canal course that's not going to break the bank, go ahead and check us out at allthingsendo.ca. You'll learn the secrets that endodontists use every day, and actually that I use every day to get down cases. So go ahead and check that out. And you know, the beauty that I love about our course, we have a private Facebook group where we've got a whole bunch of people that are on there that are just, you know, it's a safe place to post cases and questions and whatnot and learn from everything every day. Anyways, check us out, allthingsendo.ca. I've kind of stopped placing amalgam. That's on hold right now. I was placing amalgam because a good friend of mine published an article in Journal of Endodontics because he was leaving calcium hydroxide for up to a year. But what I found is that I'm not blaming her at all. This is the standard procedure. What happened was potentially we had a little piece of amalgam that was in there because there's right underneath, when I remove this restoration, there's calcium hydroxide. There's no cotton pellet, and I'm actually going to change that. But what happens is she goes to clean the operating area and blows air and water down. And what happened was a little bit piece of amalgam hid underneath the calcium hydroxide, and then it ended up at the apex. And it was my fault secondarily because I didn't rinse out the calcium hydroxide. I was going to not drill it out, but use my wave 1 gold, and that little piece of amalgam caused a little bit of havoc on my working length. Not this case, another case. So we're looking in here. There's our palatal canal. It looked actually pretty wet. Hard to say wet, but it was like this weird kind of color of liquid there. I was like, well, okay, well, I'm glad we're going to refresh it. So based on the other incident that I had, what I did was I just took my irrigating needle. Now, what I'm doing here, and I think what I would do again, what I would do is I'd have like a 10 file or something just to take the calcium hydroxide to length. I don't have my apex locator. I have my measurements. I'm going to make this as quick as possible, like 15 minutes. We're not going through working length. We're not going through all that. I have my irrigating needle bent at 2 millimeters short of my working length, which is 18 millimeters on this tooth. So what we're going to do is we're going to use my eddy just to burn out any of that calcium hydroxide. I'm not using any, well, there's one 15 file, you'll see why. But in all the other canals, we're just going to use this eddy just to remove all the calcium hydroxide as best as possible. We're not cleaning, shaping in. We don't need to, in my mind. And then what I was going to do is, because it's a large palatal canal, I'm going to use negative irrigation. So we're going to place that down the palatal canal. I bent it at 18 mils, and then just going to hold that in there, and then I'm just going to run probably about 10 to 12. If I had a larger irrigating needle, I'd probably run like 20 mils of sodium hypochlorite down there. We've got these little wee ones in the room right now. So I'm just running 3 mils at a time. So I think it came out to about 12 mils of sodium hypochlorite down that palatal canal and the other canals as well at the same time. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I find it's a really safe way of irrigating those large canals. So there's MB1, MB2, there's our distal buccal. I'm sorry, it's out of focus just a little bit. And then what I was doing was I was like, you can't see because the beam splitter only shows one bino, but way down I could see a little bit of calcium hydroxide. You can kind of see it's white at the bottom, right there. Calcium hydroxide sitting, and I was kind of like, I wonder if that's calcium hydroxide that's remaining, or is it calcium hydroxide that's just sitting on top of the lesion? I'm not sure. What I'm doing there is I'm not irrigating. I'm just using the needle end just to kind of move it around and see if I can get any motion with that. So then I was like, let's just get a file. So I took out a number 50 headstrom, and then I was just in the drawer next to me, and then I took it to length. I'm trying to like just kind of disturb that little bit of tissue at the bottom. I'm going to take it long actually. and then I'll pull it out, see if there's any debris. There's nothing. I was like, interesting. And then I was like, you know what? Let's take a look here. I think what we're gonna do. Oh, so I started drying because I didn't see anything. There was no change. I'm like, okay, well, nothing's going on. And then what happened was when I started taking my paper points, the paper points got really wet, and I was like, right there. You can't see very much, but this is all really wet. And I was like, And then we had some liquid starting to fill the canal. And my mind went, there you go. You see how wet that is? Then my mind went back to that cyst.
To take home.
And I was like, I wonder if this is actually a cyst that perhaps I poked the opening with the file and maybe the paper points. So I'm like, let's take the suction and see if we can get out of here, get out of this cyst. So I'm like, okay, well, nothing's coming here. Let's take it a little bit deeper. So I'm like, nothing. And then I'm going to push it just a little bit further down. And then boom, all this material came flying out. And I was like, whoa, what happened here? And I was kind of like, well, maybe I'm just decompressing the cyst slowly. I don't know. I mean, who knows? But after that incident, after that happened, it stopped flowing. So we didn't get any more, there was no more drainage after we did this to it. So I don't know. We'll see. What do you think? I was trying to think. I was like, consistently throughout a procedure, I'm asking the patient if they're in pain at all. He wasn't in any pain, and he didn't feel anything. So I was like, curious. And there's no more drainage. So I'm like, well, maybe. I'm not sure. Well, there's a little bit more. So we're gonna make sure that that's completely dry. We didn't have any of that from the buccal canals. And if you're wondering about my rubber dam, I just saw that I actually just did a DO restoration before. Because he's a high caries wrist. See those tears? I just finished this DO restoration before we did that, and that was just from my finishing burr getting wound up into the rubber dam. So you can see here now it's pretty darn dry. There's nothing is flowing from that lesion. So what we're going to do is we're going to place calcium hydroxide. I use these, so we dried everything, and then what I would have done, so what I did was I take these little, I rarely use these, it's a very dangerous thing in my mind, but I was like, I want to place calcium hydroxide right all the way down to the end. These, I'll have to put it in the comments. I can't remember what they're called right now because I don't use them very often. It's like a 27 gauge little tip. It's open. I have the stopper on there. I'm at 2 millimeters short of my working length. So I'm going to slowly place that in there. So it's set for 16 mils. I'm going to bring that. So this way I can see that I'm completely filling without any voids. Now, does it really matter? No, it doesn't. I have so number of cases where calcium hydroxide is not completely full all the way to the apex, and it's just taken down with a file, and we have great resolution. So that went to working length. So that in the distal buccal, in the mesial buccal. Place that down there. Now, what I would have done and what I will do again, I don't know why I didn't. I should have just had a 10 file. You can see those two canals join at some point. I should have taken a 10 file just to run it to length because I didn't get. It appears that it didn't get calcium hydroxide all the way to length, even though I did get my stopper to working length. Regardless, I don't think it really matters as long as the nidus of infection is gone. Okay, so we're going to place that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to place powder calcium hydroxide. Okay, so here's the hero shot. There's calcium hydroxide in the palate. There's calcium hydroxide in MB1, MB2. Right there. And then based on my friend in his journal, in the article, we're going to place powder calcium hydroxide. Now this is actually, I try to let my dental assistant do as much as possible. So she mixes a powder calcium hydroxide. There's no radio pacifiers in it. So when you see the radiograph, you won't see anything. So I get her to do as much as possible. So that's her fumbling around because she put too much. It was too liquacious, if that's a word. It was too too much liquid in there, so we're going to slowly dry it out. So quick way to dry it is she's just fumbling around there. Like, okay, well, because what I'm saying is that I like to empower her to do as many things as possible because it keeps her, dental assisting at sometimes can be, I imagine, fairly mundane and routine. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, but she mixed it perfect. Like she's an amazing dental assistant. So I'm going to finally dry it off a bit. You can take paper points and just use them upside down, kind of like a plugger. That removes some of the anesthetic. Oh, actually, it's not anesthetic. I'm sorry. We use sodium hypochlorite in the mix. The reason why we use sodium hypochlorite in the mix and not anesthetic is because calcium hydroxide has a pH of like 11. Anesthetic has a pH of like 3. So they are acid and base, so they're slowly going to neutralize each other. Whereas sodium hypochlorite is like pH of 12 or pH of 11. They're the same, and so they're both basic. So that way we maximize the efficacy of this antimicrobial, if you may, by maintaining that pH. So I'm just going to use a plugger. I'm going to make sure I'm going to try to clean those walls as best as possible. And the reason why is because I want this restoration to last a long time. So I'm trying to prevent any leakage because, imagine if you have any calcium hydroxide along the walls or anything like that, it will dissolve, and then there'll be a chamber. And that's the same kind of the reason why I don't like using cotton pellets, because if there's little fibrils and whatnot running up into the orifice, I'm just measuring because I'm actually prepping this for YouTube to have at least 4 millimeters of thickness of your restoration. So, but in this case, what I'm going to do is I was like, you know what, I'm going to place cotton pellet. You can place Teflon, anything you can get out of there. The thing so that was it. That's the reason why I kind of gone away from cotton pellets, is because any fibrils that are, running up the side of the wall is a potential source of leakage. Now, does it really do that? I don't know. But in any event, I'm going to place it anyways in this. And the reason why I did that is because sometimes when I go back into these teeth, it's so much faster to have something to hit. When you hit the cotton pellet, it goes, then you're like, oh, okay, we're in. It's kind of helpful to do that. And it also prevents, what I find is it also prevents any restorative debris from going down the canals. So I'm going to measure this again, just for YouTube, but it's also an indicator like, okay, you need to account for the thickness of the cotton pellet when you're placing your provisional restoration. And the reason why I'm talking about this right now is because I've seen a ton of cases that are sent to me that have been started where there's like 2 millimeters of restorative material. I'm like, well, that's just not thick enough. Maybe it's thick enough for a week, but if we're doing long-term stuff, we need a lot thicker, actually, just to prevent any leakage. Anyways, hopefully it's insightful. Hopefully that, let's go over the final periodic radiograph. So here it is. Now we've got calcium hydroxide back down. We've got, I'm not impressed with this, calcium hydroxide in our mesiobuccal and distal buccal canals, and it's radiolucent here because of the lack of any type of radiopacifiers in the powdered calcium hydroxide. So here is the start a month ago, and here's where we are today. So is there a resolution? It appears that there is, but we're going to recall back in another month and see if there's still some calcium hydroxide. Actually, I think we're going to go 3 months, so we'll see if we get any resolution in 3 months. Anyways, thank you so much for being here, and hopefully it was insightful. Let me know any of your thoughts and your comments. We'll talk to you soon.